Good morning, everybody. This is our final performance today, which we're all very happy about. And welcome to the Security Theater and our second Build to Change Summit. My name is Mordecai Rosen. I'm the General Manager of the security business here, which in my case specifically is around identity and access management and risk and fraud and payment security. I'm accompanied, standing next to the other side of the screen here, by my esteemed colleague, Sam King, who's the General Manager of the Veracode business. We're also lucky enough to be accompanied by a new addition to CA, 9 weeks in the making, Mark Curphey, who is the founder and CEO. Oh, you got to move it anyway, man. The founder
Minimal
and CEO
movement is better.
of a recent strategic acquisition of ours, pure play in the software component analysis space called SourceClear. So we're very happy to have you here. And we also have two customers that will talk about their experiences and outcomes. We have Scott Bellamy from Cardinal Health, and we have Wael Gandor from VMware, both going to talk about their experiences with the product. So that's the cast of characters today. Let me frame the discussion so we can talk about what the giant shifts that are driving the strategy for us, because they're the giant shifts that are profoundly affecting security in the industry. And they're all the major trends that you write about and we read about all the time. It's the trend of digital transformation. It's the tectonic shift to the cloud. It's the introduction of a bunch of new technologies, including IoT and containers and serverless, but the threat surface of what we're trying to protect has significantly expanded over the course of the last 5+ years, and it's a profound effect on what we have to do. And our takeaways from that, if I have to kind of codify what we're trying to integrate into our strategy, is number one, identity is the new perimeter. Identity is more important today than it was 5 years ago, and it'll be more important 5 years from now than it will be today. The second piece is application security is security. The rest of the security that we know has been woven into the fabric of the infrastructure, whether they're cloud service providers or the like. But everything that we do, everything that our customers do, is really all about application security. And the last takeaway is the scale of what we're looking at here, the scale of what we're talking about is so significantly larger than anything we've ever seen before, that the idea that 5 guys standing in front of a SOC screen can actually figure this out, it just doesn't apply anymore. So when Ayman this morning was talking about intelligent automation and the use of analytics, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, there's no other way to do it. Those things are synonymous with security, because and maybe it's augmented intelligence before it's artificial intelligence, but human beings can't sit in front of those screens anymore and do what they used to do. But, by the way, it was never very effective in the first place. It's clearly not very effective now. So we posit that security is the underpinning, the foundational layer of establishing trust in the new digital economy. Trust is critical to doing business in general, any kind of business. And so we wanted to get some definitive data. We launched this study, and it won't be published, I think, for a couple, 2-3 weeks, but we wanted to give you some highlights of some of the findings, and they're interesting. And some of them were expected, and some of them, though expected, are still kind of stunning to look at for me. So I think if you kind of take a look at these two stats, those are expected to me, that we see kind of cracks in the armor of trust, for every major breach that we've seen. And there have been some, doozies, and, a year ago I didn't think it was going to get any worse, and it got, way worse. But the one that's really interesting to me from a business perspective and how security overlays with business is this one on the right. And so the interesting thing about this is it wasn't a hypothetical question. It wasn't, what would you do if? The question is, what have you done? And 50% of the respondents said, I dropped the service. I switched to another service. So that to me is stunning. So that's the impact. So one is, the replaceability of services. You know, if you don't like vendor A, you can go to vendor B. And two is, you know, there is a place, and maybe you have to be standing on the precipice, maybe you're a foot before that, but there was a place where you would just give up on the service because you don't feel safe and secure anymore. So here are two other data points, which I think are curious because they're in complete conflict with each other. So I look at the one on the right, and it says, everybody hands down believes in secure authentication. If they had the choice, they would do 3-factor, 5-factor, 9-factor, and that's what they believe. But that's not what they do. What they do is they use the same 5 passwords they've been using since they were 18 years old. It's their kid's name with the birthday, and you kind of rotate a couple of characters.
Sounds like they're lacking a fear factor.
But the funny thing is that that seems in conflict. And you would, and I'm saying in some of the past presentations, that it's very much like talking to my 18-year-old son. Like, there's intention and there's action. Like, and it would be great if those two kind of plug together in some way. But the interesting thing about this is, my interpretation, our point of view, is they're not conflicting. This is what's required. This is what they want. They want frictionless security that's invisible until it's time not to be invisible. And we have a lot of experience here because part of my portfolio, I said before, is in risk and fraud and payment security. And it's really a fraud detection for credit card not present transactions. So when you buy things over the web, when you get that annoying little message on your phone that says enter this code, that's us. And it happens when we determine the risk of the transaction passes a certain threshold that it requires a step-up authentication. But the technology behind it to do it is actually quite sophisticated. It's, you know, I kind of think back 10 years ago, and I've been in this business for a long time. I have 12 data scientists working for me. Like, that wasn't the case. Like, that wasn't security, 10 years ago. And so this is multiple concurrent neural nets calculating risk in real time, not in near real time. In real time, for over 1 billion transactions a year, you can kind of think of, what happens during Thanksgiving and Christmas and the like.
I thought you were going to say 1 billion transactions a day.
Yeah. That would be really, if that happens, that'd be really good for my business. And so we're taking this technology that actually implements frictionless security. Because if you think of security in this context, security is fraud prevention. User experience and frictionless is don't drop the transaction, it's transaction abandonment. Like, that's the balance there. The technology we're overlaying across our entire identity portfolio. So we're doing it for our privilege access, so I can baseline what normal behavior is, I can detect in real time the risk associated with abnormal behavior, and I can take real-time actions. I can force you to authenticate again. I can record your session when I wasn't doing it before. I can drop you if I feel like it. I can change the policy associated with it dynamically. That's never happened before. Like, you codified policy, you baked it in, and you hope to God that it works. This kind of reacts in real time, leveraging the concept of analytics and machine learning, which is kind of what I was talking about. It's not only happening in security, but it's happening across the whole portfolio. We're doing it with our authentication products so that all of them can be risk-based as opposed to hard code-based. The idea of multi-factor is great, but there's the better idea. And so here's another interesting example. So the customers of ours that use our payment security came back to us and said, hey, listen, you have this giant data lake associated with all of our information, you have device reputation on all these things. Can you do the same step-up authentication you do for payments for logging into our banking application? So that's what we're talking about. Like, that's authentication, risk-based authentication, based on this very broad range of information you collected on normal and abnormal behavior. So removing friction from the system, key. Automating the system, key. The other thing that's key is embracing the developer. Because for the longest time, we in the security business said, hey, when those guys get breached enough, they'll come to us, they'll come crawling. And they never came crawling because they were writing applications, they had demands from their customers, and they weren't security guys to begin with. And so how do you wind up getting security built into that piece of the infrastructure? You come to that. And that's what we're doing. We're embracing the developer with APIs and SDKs, and that allow them to build this infrastructure into the application, because it's just not that hard. So that set of principles apply in spades to what Sam is doing on the application security side, so I will hand it over to my esteemed colleague.
Thank you, Mo. So you heard Mo talk about the fact that we really think that every company today is a software company. And if that's the case, then we need to be able to really trust the software that these companies are producing to run their businesses or to transact with their partners and customers. And that's really the area that we've been focused on as part of the Veracode business, is the security of the software applications that these organizations are either creating or buying or reusing. And because we've done this as a service since our inception, we've seen a lot of code over the years. In fact, we've analyzed over 6 trillion lines of code to date. And one of the things we do with that data is we look at it for different trends and insights, and we publish a report called the State of Software Security Report, which we publish on an annual basis. And one of the stats that we report in there, which has unfortunately stayed about the same over the course of time, is that 77% of the applications that we analyze for the first time have at least one high severity vulnerability present in them. So what that tells you is that there's still a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done around software security. And even though over the course of several years people have adopted application security practices, the reason why that number is kind of staying the same is that a lot more applications have been introduced into the mix. There are a lot more software applications today than there were a few years ago. So while people do a better job of software security, there's a lot more software that you have to contend with. And one of the things that's giving rise to that is the move to DevOps, where the whole idea behind DevOps is to create a lot more software applications faster and to iterate through those cycles in a very rapid fashion. So that's one of the trends that we're seeing. And one thing that we used to do was we used to take an application, assess it at a point in time, and give it a sort of seal and say, okay, we are saying that this application is secure and it meets these standards at this point in time. And then what we realized was that that was not going to work, because like 20 seconds after we've done that, someone has gone and introduced a new change in this application, especially if it's one of these microservices or is being used as part of a DevOps pipeline, and the attestation that we provided is no longer relevant because the application changed. So we've evolved this and we've relaunched a program that we call the Verified Program, where now we're looking at the process and the methodology associated with the creation of that software application. So we're not doing a point-in-time assessment of an application. We're actually looking at the practices around software security that are built into the software development lifecycle. And there are multiple tiers to this program depending upon the maturity that the customer has. You can start in a very basic fashion where you're just doing some level of scanning. You can introduce scanning for not just your code, but open source code, all the way to continuous, where you've got security controls integrated right into your CI/CD pipeline so that security just happens as software development happens, right? And so this is the new program we've launched, and there's a real need for this, because one of the things that we heard in a study we conducted was that 84% of organizations are including security requirements in the contracts that they're entering with their third-party vendors. So what that tells us is that there is a huge desire on the part of organizations to understand whether they can trust the software that they're getting from a third party or not. And then the 77% stat that I gave you earlier, while a lot of software isn't secure, it has at least one high severity vulnerability. So there's this big discrepancy between what the desire is and what the actuality is of software security. But the good news is that when people do implement an application security program, we have found that their pass rate relative to a standard OWASP standard, which is a standard for security for web applications, improves by 35%. So that's why we've really focused our attention on the process with the Verified Program versus a point-in-time assessment. And we've seen organizations like Home Depot, which if you think every company is a software company, they're a really big software company, and Savo, which is an ISV that produces software for sales enablement, go out and get the verified seal because they're using that as a mechanism to have that dialogue with their customers and partners and to demonstrate that they take security seriously and help them gain trust in the software applications that they're producing. Now, one of the things that we do is also look at our data by industry segment to see if we see any similarities or differences between different industry sectors. And one of the things we found was that healthcare was unfortunately lagging behind when it came to security. Only 27% of healthcare organizations were passing against that standard, the OWASP standard that I was referencing. So that actually makes me very happy to introduce one of our customers, Scott Bellamy, who's with Cardinal Health, because he's bucking that trend. He has implemented a great application security program inside his organization, and so I'd like to ask Scott to come up here and talk to us a little bit about that.
Take my place.
So, by the screen. Thank you for joining us today, Scott. I appreciate you talking to everybody about your program. So maybe we can start by first just talking about who Cardinal Health is, because I was certainly surprised to learn how large and complex this organization is, and so maybe everybody's not familiar with who they are. So who's Cardinal Health?
Yeah, it's not surprising if there are folks here that's not real familiar with Cardinal Health. Cardinal Health, first of all, is not a health insurance company. That's a common misconception. Cardinal Health is really essential to care of patients. We're not a healthcare provider, but we're essential to care in a couple of key ways. One is we're a key player in the healthcare supply chain. Cardinal Health provides cost-effective solutions in the healthcare supply chain, driving efficiencies in the healthcare supply chain. Cardinal Health also provides a large number of products and services, both some that we manufacture ourselves and others that we distribute from other manufacturers. Those products are essential to the care of patients. And so when you're looking at that in the context of this discussion, you're looking at we need to provide solutions to our customers, and they interact with us through web applications just like they interact with most other companies. We need to provide solutions to those customers that are secure. When you look at the tenets of security, the three fundamental tenets of security, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, our solutions have to be available. We have to deliver those products to our customers on time, and we have to protect their information and the information of the patients.
That's great. So in the context of that mission and that ethos of essential to care, what did software security mean for you in Cardinal Health?
Yeah, so our as a kind of building on what I've already said, our customers depend on us to deliver products and services to them at the time they need them. In some cases, it's per patient doses of medications that have to be available first thing in the morning for a surgery, for example. So we have to have that available. And they also rely on us, as I mentioned, to protect their information. So when we're looking at doing those things in the context of the web applications that they interact with us using, we have to make sure that we're building security in. And that's a great statement to say. It's harder to do. And so, shifting security left, getting developers to write secure code versus having to go back and fix it later is what we're striving to do.
And so tell me, what are some of the challenges that you ran into as you were trying to roll this out? Because 50,000 person organization, development teams all over the place, and when the rubber hits the road, it's not straightforward, right? Like we were saying, it's easy to say that let's go do this, but when you actually try to do this in a complex environment such as yours, it's difficult. So what were some of the challenges you ran into, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, when we started off, the first place that we started was static application security testing, and it still is a very valuable tool. And in fact, if you're looking to move security left, that's really a big opportunity to do so is with static testing. One of the first tools that we started using was very cumbersome for developers to integrate into their processes. And it was causing a lot of challenges, and it was really starting to stall out our application security program as a result, because developers were just not adopting it, they weren't testing it, and they were having all sorts of challenges with it. And so to solve that, we said we've got to find a better solution. And so we ultimately ended up selecting CA Veracode as our testing tool. It integrates very easily with the development process. They provide e-learning and some other capabilities that help developers learn how to develop secure code versus having to find out that it's not secure later and then go back and fix it.
And how have your customers experienced this, right? Because they don't necessarily see software security, nor should they, right?
Right.
But what is the end user impact of some of these software security practices that you've now brought into the organization?
Yeah, like with any organization today, we're looking at, we've been making that shift from that waterfall methodology to agile. Security has to fit in with the agile process. It has to integrate in with it. It has to be a part of it. It can't be just something you're trying to add on later, or you're going to fundamentally break the agile processes that our DevOps strategies are trying to put in place. And so, what from our customer perspective, what they care about is we're delivering the products and services they need on time, and in an ever-changing healthcare landscape, we have to have the agility to shift with the industry. If we're not building our security processes in with our agile processes, we're not going to be able to do that. So that's one of the key impacts to our customers. Another is that our customers obviously care about security, and so they're asking us, what are you doing to make sure that the solutions you're providing us are secure? And so, one of the answers that we can give them is related to our application security program and the fact that we're building security into the solutions that we're building for them.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing
Sure.
that with us, Scott. So with that, maybe I can turn my attention to SourceClear. So I'm going to welcome Mark Curphey up here. Mark was the CEO and founder of SourceClear, which is an open source security company that we acquired 9 weeks ago, I guess, at this point in time.
9 weeks, yes.
9 weeks. One of the reasons why we were very interested in SourceClear is that if our value proposition is to deliver software security solutions to our customers, and if we're not able to help them on this risk associated with all the open source code that they are using, then our value proposition is incomplete. So we were attracted to SourceClear because we really liked some of the ways in which they were going about the open source problem. They had as their central design point the developer. So from the get-go, their focus was on creating technology that a developer can use in a very friction-free way that fits right into the DevOps processes, into the CI/CD pipeline. So your open source security risk just happens as part and parcel of what your software development process is. So with that, Mark, let me turn it over to you and have you talk a little bit about SourceClear, and I know we have one of your customers joining us too.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I am so blown away by 75% of applications having a severe vulnerability. Imagine testing a car and three out of the 4 brakes fail. Or 3 out of the 4 seatbelts fail. It's kind of crazy. It's just totally unacceptable. Yet it's still the standard.
It's the norm right now.
It's the norm, and that's what we've kind of almost becoming desensitized to accepting. And it's clearly not a sustainable way. So what we did at SourceCare, a relatively early startup. We've, as Sam mentioned, 9 weeks. It's been 9 very busy weeks. RSA conference, seeing a lot of customers and a lot of work going on. But really, SourceCare was based around a concept of 3 things. We really saw 3 massive trends happening when we created the company. So, classic kind of startup, back of a napkin, or if you're British, back of a cigarette packet, right? You get a pen out, or back of a beer mat, I guess. And there were 3 things that were happening. The first was the cloud, right? So what that fundamentally meant is that developers all of a sudden got to choose their tooling. You didn't need to go to IT for a set of tools that were there done. You go spin up a free trial on the web, you put in your corporate card, you avoid procurement, and you get to choose the tooling that you want to go use. So that's a fundamental shift in what was happening. The second one was basically how we were building software. So that was open source. All of a sudden, I was at Microsoft, and all of a sudden the amount of code that we were putting in that was open source was absolutely prolific. Instead of creating it all ourselves, we took someone else's code and we glued it together. And to give you an idea of that today, even companies like Cisco, 3/4 of their code was not created by Cisco, right, in their products. If you go look to all the startups in the city, 95% plus is the norm. There are some, 98% of the code is not created by them, and they're shipping services that you guys use all day long. So it's fundamentally changing how that happens. And the third was then DevOps. Everyone aspired to figuring out how to automate security. The DevOps pipelines never meant that's a choice anymore. You have to do it or security won't happen. So those three things were fundamentally changing the way we thought about security. The old way of doing it is you had to go to IT before you could deploy into their data center. They would do a final checkoff. All the rules got thrown out of the window. And so that's really what we built, was how do we help people use open source safely at the speed of DevOps. The, of course, thesis played out on the internet last October with the biggest breach in history. Was a result of people using open source code that was vulnerable, that was not updated. And that is now the new normal, right? Every time you open the newspaper now, there's another breach that's happened. There was a Wi-Fi one recently with, in the Apple Store. Again, it was exactly the same open source library reused across loads of Wi-Fi routers. And so what's really happened is that reusable code means reusable vulnerabilities. And the bad guys have figured that out. So it's the same kind of conditions that created when we saw viruses proliferate in the 90s. All of a sudden, one virus would be written, it would work on everyone's Windows machine, and would be able to spread. The difference is that today, instead of that attacking a single desktop, it's right in the heart of business software. So instead of it being a small value, my grand's laptop and the value of that, now it's in the heart of an online bank. It's in the heart of a data science system. And so the stakes are significantly higher. The economics from the attacker have completely changed. And the way to get those bad things into software through DevOps, we've essentially created a mule where we can go apply that bad code and push it straight up into the heart of business. So we're in for an interesting ride. We hopefully we've got some great technology that allows people to continue embracing open source and use it safely in this DevOps world, but we're definitely in a new world and a new way of doing things. So with that, I'd like to invite Wael Gandor up. We've known Wael along our startup journey from the early days.
In terms of your methodology, are you similar to what Black Duck does in terms of evaluating each piece of open source to see what's inside? You have a different...
Well, where a lot of those companies came from is they really came from an auditor's world. So They were really designed to be run from a desktop. The challenge in the DevOps world is by the time those results are shipped to an auditor, it's 1,000 times out of date. So every single time you rerun the build, all the results are different. So what SourceClear does is sits in line in the DevOps process, so you're always up to date, you always know exactly what you're using. So the way we think about it is there's a sort of first generation of those tools, and then there's a second generation of those tools without second generation.
But the DevOps process has to adopt your tool in order to help. If they don't
The
adopt,
developers literally change one line of code and everything works. So in large organizations, the developers actually don't really know anything's happening until they have to update a library or they realize they've got a problem and it goes into the DevOps workflow. So again, the user experience is key. You cannot be friction, to Mo was talking in pipeline, or it simply won't happen these days. It has to be seamless, it has to provide value into those. Maybe that's a good segment for Wael. Wael was, what we saw in the early days is we saw what we called AppSec 1.0 people. So these are the sort of people that were writing policy, being prescriptive and sort of saying no. And then there was a set of kind of AppSec 2.0 people who were enabling the developers to move at speed. And we partnered with Wael. Wael has a great story around how he's done that. Maybe you can share some of those tips.
Sure, because one of the first challenges a security team or a security practitioner runs into is being able to scale. So in my case, I was working on a team that was building microservices, which means a whole bunch of teams developing a whole bunch of functions. And I was the only security person, if you will. And we were shipping multiple services per week, which sometimes meant I didn't even know that we were shipping them. And there was no way for me to scale that process. And so you start thinking about, okay, how do we build this thing in? And so it's fairly obvious. Yes, everyone needs to do their share. But you also can't just dump a list of requirements for developers to also work. Like, they're fixing bugs, they're trying to make sure the thing actually works, and now you also tell them, hey, I also want you to run this tool. It's not going to be very friendly, the output is going to be hard to interpret, and it might not always tell you the truth. So it's obviously a tall order. So then the other thing you realize is, if you want to make a meaningful statement around, okay, what does our threat surface looks like? The very first step is understanding what makes up that software. And so really the first step is inventory. You hear that all the time. Oh, do you know what's running in your data center? So it's sort of a similar thing as, do you know what makes up your application? Okay, there's a certain percentage which is homegrown code, the rest is open source, and those ratios have changed drastically as sort of the new productivity model for Agile has changed. So it does mean, though, you still need the same sort of security sanity checks. And so you do need new tools and new approaches. So one is you need to do this process continuously, and it doesn't mean one person doing it manually continuously. It's not going to work. And second, it needs to be a tool that engineers can actually use. It cannot be something that only the security teams use. And a number of security teams have shifted from providing very prescriptive, sort of very concrete, specific steps that engineers need to follow, and have gone more to, hey, here's the outcome we're going for, and there's a number of ways you can follow to get there, and as long as you're doing one of those, whatever works for you, then we're good. And the security team sort of consumes that output out of band, so they're still doing the trust but verified kind of model. So for this challenge of getting a grip on third-party software security, we evaluated a number of approaches. And again, if we deep dive into what this problem entails, one is doing this inventory. Second is doing this mapping between, well, I'm using library X. Is there a publicly known vulnerability associated with it? And third, what does it mean for us? Just because it's vulnerable doesn't necessarily mean you have to patch immediately, or it may be the case. So you also have to do this contextual analysis. So, and then you get to the point of, do we integrate it, at this phase of the development lifecycle? Do you want your developers to also run a scan themselves, perhaps, before they even check it in? So the benefit to that is they also become aware of the implications of importing a library. Like, there's a very real cost associated with importing or using a third-party open source library. So yeah, we had to sort of address all of those, and in our case, SourceClear was a tool that kind of really fit the bill in that sense. And we faced surprisingly little resistance from engineers once they kind of understood, one, the problem statement, why we need to do this, and second, how the tool sort of functions, which is very simple. It provided for a very decent user experience as far as security tools go. And then from a security team standpoint, it just really kind of solved that problem that we're trying to go for. So
great, thank you. I always use a little anecdote just worth helping you understand, frame the problem. So if you're familiar with the vote.gov system online, it's where you enter register for the US voting system. Obama had an executive order to release 80% of the open source code. So that code's up on GitHub. That code specified 19 libraries, open source libraries, to be used. When you actually build that code, 585 libraries get used. We looked at the code. I can tell you there are thousands of developers in at least 50 countries that produced that code for the US voting system. That's the complexity of open source and how it gets used. So it is, we're playing in a different game these days than we played it before, and we're only going to continue to do that. The march of open source is not halting in any sense. So it's an exciting world.
So on that disturbing note, I'd like to thank you all for your time. Let me give you a few key takeaways. One is, identity is critical in the next generation of security. It just is. If I know who you are, I can control access. And that is part of everything we're doing. DevSecOps is the path to application security. And we at CA are both embracing the developer and using our long-standing experience with AI and analytics and machine learning to remove as much friction out of the security environment as we possibly can to deliver on this concept across the board of frictionless security. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.